Hey, what's happening, everybody? This is Doolin from Facebook here, the admin of the Facebook page that you are so fond of. Just want to take a moment and say thank you for following the page. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you've ever listened to this podcast before, there's been a number of podcasts that I've done over the years. And I just wanted to take a moment to let everybody know this is actually the last podcast I'm going to be doing. If you actually listened to the last podcast, which took place sometime back in 2016. I said I had a new job and it would keep me traveling all over the country, so I didn't have a lot of time for it, but I would come back and do podcasts from time to time. Well, as it turns out, I had an even better job offer, and it had me traveling not all over the country, but I now travel all over the world, as I have been for the past year and a half, and the podcasting just kind of fell to the wayside. And although I would really like to come back and do podcasts again one day, one, I don't really have time for it, and two, this show was something special for me. But as we move forward into the future and I see that there's about 1,000,002 other podcasts that offer exactly what this one offers. It's all just nerd humor and talking about comic books, movies, video games. It doesn't really have a specific focus on anything. So I'm going to take some time. I'm going to regroup. And then one of these days when I decide to come back and do podcasting again, maybe something a little bit more focused. So once again, just that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. And enjoy this last episode of Welcome to Nerdtopia.
Catching in the corner of Dr. Doom's basement, but he's our homie, so we never ever pay rent. N to the E to the Nerdtopia, like a plasma cannon man, you know we're steady smoking. Yep, comics, books, movies, and video games are our claim to fame and recognition of name. We've changed the reign, but kept it the same, and we hope to gain acclaim from time and again. We're coming at you repeating from Walking Dead, and you know we got pissed when the Redding ran red. A plethora of guests, even more than Bill and Ted. The ratings of the Lost are gonna go to our head. It's dangerous to go alone, your iPod should have us, and Superheroes got a back and that you can trust. We're blowing up crazy large, like our name was Alderaan, so let's give a hand to Doolin, cause his mic is on. Word.
What's happening, Nerdtopia? Welcome back for another round of Welcome to Nerdtopia. I am Doolin Dalton, joined by...
It's me, Robert Benjamin Jaffe. Hello, Nerdtopia.
So this is going to be kind of fun. I thought that it would be appropriate, given the state of affairs with Infinity War just released, that I would sit down and discuss, the past of not just the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself, but superhero movies as a whole, where they've come from, where they're going, and where we are right now. So the past, the present, and the future, if you will. And there's really nobody better to do it than this guy sitting across from me right now, because Rob and I go back, like almost 20 years now, and we became comic book fans during the time when it was not okay to be a comic book fan. So I think it's kind of funny, it's so widespread and so mainstream in the media nowadays, and you can throw a rock and find someone to talk about, did you see Infinity War? And at least 3 people at work are going to want to talk to you about Infinity War. But of course, back in the day when we were in high school and we wanted to discuss Keaton's Batman, nobody wanted to talk about that shit with us. Nobody. It wasn't okay back then. Well, I guess it was okay within certain circles.
Right. It was just smaller circles. It was like you had it was a niche type thing. So you had your friends who specifically loved the nerd material, and then everybody else who looked down on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were a couple of socially awkward kids too, so it didn't make it any easier by the fact that we didn't know how to talk to anybody. So we just kind of hung out with each other. So I know how I found my way into comic books, and particularly that form of media. What about you, Rob? I think I was in 9th grade when I met you, I think. So at the age of 15?
Yeah, I was 13 when I came down to Florida. I had been living in Philadelphia for a long time. So we're talking about how we got into superheroes.
Yeah, just how you found your way into it.
Okay. So, my first experience with superheroes was Spider-Man. When I was 3 years old, I was Spider-Man for Halloween in some kind of weird knockoff Spider-Man costume,
Sure. the vinyl costume with the plastic mask. Those were always the best in the 80s.
With the yellow in the costume, because Spider-Man had yellow in his
of course,
in his awesome.
Where you would lose 20 pounds just walking around from house to house trick or treating that night because you'd sweat. Those things did not breathe.
And as a 3-year-old, it was a very necessary thing because I was a fatty, and you gotta watch your weight if you're gonna be Spidey. So I think it was in 6th grade that my nerdness took the next level when not 6th grade, 2nd grade. Mm-hmm. I had Superman pajamas, so I wore them underneath my clothing.
Oh gosh!
And
I think I did something similar. Now that you mention it,
yeah. So during like a school assembly, I ran to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, of course.
Came back out. Superman would go, "I'm here to save us all from boringness."
Sorry.
And I got kind of blank stares, as I'm sure I'm getting them now. And for some reason, I didn't take that lesson, and I did this exact same thing in my daycare like a few hours later. Mm-hmm. That was my early experience with like superheroes. Was trying to like show people like how cool Superman is. Look, you can be a normal kid, and then now you're Superman. And they did not seem to be impressed by that idea. It took a while to get like really into this superhero thing. Like I started with Marvel cards.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever?
Oh gosh, man!
Yeah?
Marvel Universe trading cards, dude. I had so many of those.
I still do. I've got many boxes in my father's house right now of just so many superhero cards. And that was
were they the ones that had the power ratings on the back of them?
Yes.
So, and then you would get the like Eternity, and it was just off the charts.
Yeah,
it was like
Beyonder. 10.
Oh yeah, or some of them were just off the charts. Like, yeah, we can't even tell you how powerful this guy is because as writers, we don't know. We're leaving it innocuous in case we need him to do something that we haven't been able to do yet. Deus Ex Machina for the win.
Infinite power.
Pretty much.
So I think like really my first superhero movie, besides maybe seeing Superman on TV as a kid, on TV as a kid, was seeing Batman in the theater.
1989.
Did you get to see Batman in the theater?
I'm trying to. I would have been about 8 years old when it came out. I don't remember if I saw it in theaters. I remember like the big one I remember was like the following year, and I'll classify this as a superhero movie. Was when Ninja Turtles came out.
Yeah,
and that was in 1990, and at that point in my life, I was just into all things Ninja Turtles, like the cartoon. I'd say the comics, but honestly, I was too young for the comics.
I didn't see the comics until I was an adult.
But they made kiddie versions of the comics, and I read those and stuff. So the cartoon, and then when the movie came out, it was like these characters that I've only seen like on the comic strip and on the cartoon screen, like coming off of the screen, like big, bold, and then when Raphael looks down at the sign and says, "Damn!" And I was, as an 8-year-old kid, 9 years old, you know what that does to you? You're like, oh, shit.
I just learned a new word.
I mean, I knew the word already. I was not allowed to say that word. But I was like, he's using the bad word. Ooh, this is an edgy superhero. So that was kind of like my first foray into like superheroes and movies was probably with the Ninja Turtles. And then I think like the following year when Batman came out on VHS, I think I bought it and I watched it like many times.
Right.
And that was kind of cool. And up until that, like my only other experience with like superheroes on the screen was probably like, the 1979 Superman with Christopher Reeve, which, is a classic and still most of it still holds up to this day.
I mean, it's a very fine movie for what it is. Superman doesn't have any like villains per se. Like Lex Luthor is a villain, but it's more about him just doing right in the world and like his sense of moral compass.
Right.
Batman was pretty different. Mm-hmm. That was very much about like revenge and
I mean it was different and it was kind of cool to see like a darker superhero on the screen for that time.
Right.
I still say to this day that Burton doesn't understand Batman, and that's fine.
He doesn't.
And that's okay because he did give us something that we didn't have before.
Yes. And that changed things. Like I mean, I think it was after Batman came out that we started. I wanted to see more superheroes on the big screen, but it just didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
Like all through the 90s, we had lots of cartoons. We have the X-Men cartoon, Batman the Animated Series, the Spider-Man cartoon. But what we're not getting are these big screen adaptations of it. And
Right.
I did not, for the life of me, understand why. Why can't we have superhero movies?
Oh, because, I mean, at that point in time, it was still, no matter, like, the Burton's Batman or whatever, in that darker take, it was still kiddie stuff at that point. Like,
It was
still
corny, yeah.
It was really corny. I mean, like, go back and watch, like, Batman. Hell, go back and watch Batman Returns, 1992's Batman Returns. It's so campy and it doesn't hold up. And everybody ate it up and we loved it, but it really doesn't hold up. But the point I'm getting around to here is the fact that those movies were just not taken seriously at that point in time. They were kiddie movies. So any movie studio that picked up any type of movie property really either advanced on it very carefully, or they just went the other extreme with it and said, all right, this is for kids. Let's just make it for kids.
Right. Hence Steel.
Steel,
right.
yeah. So that was more like for young teens
They
kind of
didn't
movie.
care about the comic. They weren't trying to adapt the comic book. They said, okay, we see a guy in an iron suit and he's
What's
black.
selling right now?
Yeah.
Shaquille O'Neal.
Boom. We're done. We don't need to put any more thought into this. We can just sell it. And that's...
Fresh off the success of Shaq Fu.
Right. Yeah, I think that we basically just saw that reflected all through the 90s. They were not giving us superhero films that were genuinely for us, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess that reinforced our feeling that we were kind of isolated. Like yeah, we've got superheroes and nobody else does.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, but at that time I was reading the comic books a lot. Were you getting into the comics?
You know what I was doing is I was reading the comic books, but not in so much as I had like subscriptions. It was basically like on a Saturday I would be like, hey, Mom, Dad, take me down to the comic book shop. Like, fine, we're running errands. We'll stop you in. Here's $20. You can get some comic books, whatever. And I would just kind of pick whatever off the shelf looked appealing to me with no idea with what was happening in the story or who these characters were. I would just kind of look at it and I would enjoy the art, and I would, kind of read through the stories and like, oh, that's interesting, and then just not really continue. And then next week I would just buy a whole new set of comic books and stuff. But I did get to know some of the characters through that, and and as we went further through, it's kind of what drew me in with X-Men and things like that. But I didn't want to cut you off of your point because I think you were going somewhere with that.
Well, I mean, that is kind of my point. So, like, what you're talking about, like, when you were buying comic books, you were getting like the classic superhero comic books, and there was the serial thing that was happening.
Spider-Man,
Every
Punisher
issue bleeds into the next issue. All of the superheroes tie into this major superhero world, and I mean, I was very into that. But I think it was probably in the mid-'90s when I began my transition into more adult comics. Like, that's when I first read Preacher. And so that's a...
One would argue you were probably too young to be reading Preacher in the mid-'90s, sir, but that's okay.
I was 16. I could handle reading about Hairstar's erection.
Okay.
It was okay. So there was that element of like what made superhero comics so fun, which is that like all the stories tie in together.
Right.
But it was also starting to deal with adult issues, and that piqued my interest. And then I started reading things like Batman: The Dark Knight Returns and Earth X.
Things that had something to say. It wasn't just a good guy versus bad guy fantasy anymore. Like, they were making statements as they went forward with these stories.
And the idea of good guy, bad guy started to slip for me a little bit. So,
sure. Well, I mean, and that's the sign of a good writer. If you can blur that line between hero and villain and make you kind of think and second guess those villains' motivations for a minute, like, well, maybe he's not so evil. He just has a different take on things.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, because I could say that, but when I look at The Dark Knight Returns, it's not so much that I empathize with the Joker. It's more that I critique Batman. Like, I'm not looking at Batman in Batman: The Dark Knight Returns like, wow, he's so great. I end up thinking, wow, he's very selfish, and he's not really looking at the whole world around him, and he's making a lot of choices that make him happy, but aren't really about the greater good.
Right.
And that's an interesting turn.
Well, the most important thing about Batman, especially if you're trying to empathize with him and get on his level, is to have your mother be named Martha.
Yeah, it helps a lot, right? It'll stop me from killing you. If our moms had the same name, we're cool.
Why did you say that name?
Why did you say that name? So that
we are not so different, you and I. Our mothers are both named Martha.
Yeah. So I walked out of the 90s expecting that I'm never going to really get superhero movies.
Right. I mean, we just weren't gonna see these more adult stories on screen. If they made one, it was going to be for kids.
Right. So initially I'm told, I talked with my stepfather back in the 90s about the idea of maybe having an Avengers movie or an X-Men movie, and he tells me that will never happen. Never happen. And his reason is there's too many characters. There's too many people vying for who's going to be the main character, and no actor is going to let themselves just become a side
I
character.
was going to say, I'll go pull 12 people off the street right now and be like, you want to be in the Fantastic Four? You got to share the spotlight with 3 other people. Yes. I'll do it.
Yeah, it's a different world now. He makes this argument about Spider-Man and Iron Man. They won't make those movies because they have to wear the mask the whole time, and no actor is going to want to hide their face away from the audience. I mean, it made sense at the time. Maybe that's that old logic. But by the time we get to the 2000s, everything gets upended. It becomes a whole new ball game. What do we get? We get X-Men in 2000, right?
I think it was, I think it was 2000 or whatever. And to me, that was huge. I remember, I had plans with my friends to go see it because, as I had mentioned earlier, I grew up watching X-Men in the 90s. Mm-hmm. That cartoon series. And actually, that was a really well-written series for the most part. If you go back and watch it, some of the scripts hold up. Some of it's campy and stuff, but some of those scripts, really hold up. Yeah. And, and I that's what really kind of pulled me into the X-Men comic books. And I actually did read Uncanny X-Men for a good, 6-month stretch there, just, solid. And so I remember waking up, I think I was just out of high school, when that movie came out. And waking up, calling my friends, saying, X-Men, it's X-Men, today's the day, we're going to see X-Men. And then, so, me and this group of losers got on our comic book T-shirts and went down there, and we were the only fucking people there. Because, 20th Century Fox really kind of took a risk with that property. And you know what? It really was not the best movie.
No, it's not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the first time that we get something remotely like that.
Exactly. And we had, and it's funny, and I remember in the 90s sitting in my room with friends, probably you at some point going, if they ever made an X-Men movie, who should play Professor X? Patrick Stewart. Dude, he's bald, man. He looks just and then there. I was it's they heard my prayers.
Yeah, they were what's the perfect casting? Oh, that guy, great.
Just give him who the nerds want. It's fine. And then Hugh Jackman, who did surprisingly well for the role. You had a group of relative unknowns for that picture, but it was entertaining. It was entertaining, and it gave us what we wanted for the first time. And I guess it did relatively well at the box office because that's what kind of opened it up. They're well, this movie did okay. Let's start experiment. We'll put in for a sequel, and we'll start experimenting with some other properties.
Right. It's fascinating because Marvel was going through bankruptcy at that time.
Yeah, they were selling off. I think, didn't they? They sold. What did they sell the movie rights to Sony? I was a meager sum for the character of Spider-Man. To make movies.
It's the only one they wanted to.
Yeah, because that's the flagship character of Marvel was Spider-Man. But it was I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a meager sum, and basically selling the rights to Sony was the only thing that kept the comic books afloat at that time. So you can thank Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man for saving Marvel, I guess.
I mean, well, I think the X-Men helped a lot too. I don't disagree that yeah, I think the films are what saved them, and maybe destroy them too. So like I was saying, I came off of when coming into the X-Men, I had already begun this transition into looking for more literary type stories, right? So X-Men sort of plays to that. What do you get? You get it opens with a Holocaust scene.
Yeah,
that's a pretty bold move.
Yeah, for a kids movie.
Yeah, opening your superhero movie for nerds with a Holocaust scene. Yeah, that's bold. And you could argue that follows through with X-Men 2, and then just immediately drops off for X-Men 3. They're just none of that.
They had no idea what they were doing for the story. They're oh, we got to make another one of these? Well, let's just put in what the kids want to see, I guess. It doesn't really matter how they get there.
Yeah.
It's fine.
it's really Singer's fault because he left. Like, if Singer had stayed with X-Men and not gone off to make Superman Returns, we probably have a decent conclusion.
So now we have a crappy X3 and a crappy Superman movie. Thanks, Bryan Singer.
Yeah, you ruined it for everyone.
But the point I was getting around about to there is with that they really started to branch out and explore other properties. So then, of course, in 2002, you have Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and you know what? For all its flaws and stuff, it was a fun movie. It wasn't Shakespeare, but it was fun. It was fun to watch it on screen. I remember seeing it on opening night and think that was a great movie. That was awesome. I really had fun in the movie theater, and that's really all it should have been. Was just dumb fun, you know.
Sure. Okay, so should have been. Yeah, I think Spider-Man is a difficult character to turn into like a literary type scenario. He's not really made for you to overthink. You know, even like stuff like the death of Gwen Stacy. That's a powerful story, but it doesn't mean much outside of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not a scenario where you're going to personally run into at some point in your life where you have to save somebody and then you accidentally kill them. That's not
every Tuesday, man.
Oh. I gotta stay more in touch with you, man. Your life is going crazy. So I wouldn't expect Spider-Man to have like a Holocaust scene in it. But you know, the first Spider-Man didn't do much for me. I liked it okay. I thought Spider-Man 2, like X-Men 2, like upped their game considerably.
Actually, I still maintain to this day that Spider-Man 2 is still one of my favorite superhero movies.
It's fantastic. Yeah. It doesn't say... Okay, so there is a literary aspect to Spider-Man 2. It might not be like presented as a very deep story, but it is about like how when we don't fulfill who we're supposed to be, if we're not being who we're supposed to be, we shut ourselves down as a result of it. Like, we aren't able to be the best that we can be. That's an important lesson for kids. Like, you've got to embrace who you are.
Yep, this is true. Yeah, and then, you know, we won't get into Spider-Man 3. That was kind of where what is it with three parters and then them just having a good two first acts and then just totally shitting on it in the third.
Well, I think it's really about the studio system trying to make bank. It is a common problem. Because you can see it with X-Men 3 and Spider-Man 3, but you could also probably see that with Batman Forever, Superman 3, Godfather 3, even to some degree. There's something that happens where studios, I think, intervene, and they're just like, well, we've got to make it bigger and more powerful and explosions, and like it's got to be the ultimate version of the thing, as opposed to letting a director or writer look at the story as is and figuring out a suitable conclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, we should probably talk about The Dark Knight Rises too, but I feel like we'll get there.
We'll get there. Yeah. Yeah. So that was in the early 2000s, and I think, you know, Spider-Man ran throughout the first half of the 2000s, but by that point, they're trying other things, and you know, these other movie studios that own these properties are kind of Fox and you know, and Warner Brothers as well. They're branching out and they're trying. So, you know, the success of Spider-Man, you know, Warner Brothers is like, well, maybe it's time we bring back our flagship character, and they tried a thing with to bring back Superman, and they tried a thing.
Superman Returns.
They tried a thing, and that was in the 2006 Superman Returns. Right. But also by that point, they had also brought back Batman. They're like, all right, it's been enough time. We're going to give Batman a reboot, and for something I felt kind of worked for that time, for 2005 when Batman Begins came out. And then they were also going other directions too, like Fantastic Four, Ghost Rider, Daredevil, Punisher, Daredevil. I mean, and they were just kind of throwing everything to the wall to see what stuck. Right. Not a lot was really working at that point.
Right.
But
why do you think that is? Why do you think that they weren't working?
I think it was just at that point in time, it was just comic books needed to find their defining place on screen. You know, what works on the page doesn't work on screen when you need something like a 3-act structure. You know, it's just like taking comic books and putting them into a movie is basically like taking a television show and adapting it for the screen. Yeah. You know, you need a solid 3-act structure, but prior to that, it was just something that would just give you a little bit of the story every week, that had all of these richly woven subplots and characters and stuff like that. Well, we don't have time for all that shit now.
Right.
We gotta get Punisher up there on screen, kill his family, let him discover his origins, and let him kill the bad guy in the end. And we need to do that within under 2 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So a lot gets cut out, and I think a lot gets lost in translation and just trying to get... Basically, the big appeal is, since we're talking about the Punisher, is just to see the guy up there, and he's got the skull on his chest, and he's got the machine gun, and he's shooting the bad guys. Like, that's... And then you see the comic books page brought to life on screen. And that's the appeal. That's all you're really getting out of those movies.
Just a slight derivation here. Like, the Punisher series, do you think that's more successful than the Punisher film?
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading a little bit of Punisher when I was a kid, and those were not for kids.
No, they're not.
They're definitely not for kids. I just remember reading it, being maybe 11, 12 years old, going, "Oh man, that's intense." He literally just carved that guy's face in prison.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean that was the Punisher comics, man.
Yeah. Ultra violent, no real moral redeeming value. Just revenge story.
Yeah, pure revenge. Like my family was murdered, so I'm just gonna go ahead and murder everybody else.
Vengeance for all.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
He's that one thing that Batman didn't want to become.
Right. So I feel like I agree with what you're saying about like these Marvel movies and these superhero movies coming out in the early aughts. They're not really trying to do anything besides make a buck and sell like a product. I feel like maybe the thing is that they weren't so concerned with character.
No.
And that's what made Batman Begins such a revelation, because our experience with Batman up until that point was rather thin. Like, you can say what you like. I like Michael Keaton's Batman. I think they're very enjoyable films. But Batman's not like a character in those films. He's like a force of nature.
Like to this day, I still say my favorite portrayal of Batman out of any of the movies, any medium, well, maybe not so with the comics, but more like mainstream media, is probably still the animated series from the 90s. Like, they made good original stories. I mean, some of them were based on comics, some of them were original, but ultimately, that was kind of my experience with Batman. That's where I fell in love with Batman, was when the 90s rolled around and they gave us the animated series.
Yeah, I mean, that was some of the best Batman stories ever told, and it was exciting. And despite the fact that it was a cartoon, he felt like a fully fleshed out character. Yeah. Like, this is somebody who's experienced things and now is making choices because of those experiences, as opposed to this kind of nebbish, I'm a billionaire and I'm sad because my parents are dead. And so I feel like Christopher Nolan took that to a whole other level. He wasn't afraid to throw out parts of Batman's origin that didn't work for him and to change things to suit his story. Like Bruce Wayne going to kill Joe Chill in the Batman Begins film was kind of shocking for me. I was genuinely surprised. I did not think that we would see him going to kill this guy, and then he doesn't get to do it, and that's an interesting choice. Yeah. That he's robbed of his vengeance. I felt like Nolan was trying to take a classic literary character type art model and build on that to a cinematic universe. And you contrast that with what Singer was doing with Superman, and you can see why Superman Returns doesn't work. Yeah, because he's not really building a new character in Superman Returns. He's just giving us
it's just Christopher Reeve Part 2,
right? So I don't know that he was wrong about like his assessment of like the world has changed and that means Superman might have to change. That's an interesting way of looking at it. But ultimately, you have to do that by grounding it in a character that we give a shit about.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't manage to do that with Superman Returns, but I felt like they did do it with Batman pretty successfully in the mid 2000s. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that kind of compelled the next wave of superhero films that was to come, because I mean, that gave birth to The Dark Knight and Iron Man, which came out the same year within like a month of each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Iron Man is the start of something else, and we'll get to that here. We're like right on the cusp. We're getting there to what I kind of consider to be, and I think a lot of people would agree, would be the golden age of superhero movies, which is where we are now, because it's never going to be this good again.
That's it. I think of the Golden Age as Batman 1966, Superman 1979.
Oh, of course, yeah, absolutely, yeah, sure.
Oh,
you're serious?
I mean, no, seriously.
I thought you were joking.
No, I do seriously feel that way. Like, I don't think that they're great. I think that Golden Age isn't necessarily about it being the best.
Oh, okay.
Like Golden Age is typically referred to as the dawn of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of the Golden Age, I think of it as literally the dawn, like even Batman World War II films, like Batman and Robin fighting Nazis.
Oh god. Well, I mean, I guess if it's good enough for Cap, it's good enough for Bruce.
It's true. This is to me is the modern age. Like I think that Iron Man and Dark Knight represent the transition from the Silver Age of superhero films, which is Batman in the 90s and stuff, to the modern age, which is, okay, we can literally do anything now, but we're not quite there yet. We're almost there. We're almost to literally do anything. Because Iron Man was still being shot on film.
Yeah.
And it was still dealing with practical effects. He was literally wearing an Iron Man suit in much of that film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal, right? Because that's no longer the case. They're not wearing giant robot suits anymore.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that just kind of all gave way and it rolled around to 2008's Iron Man,
right?
And when they first announced they were doing Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr., I was like, this is an interesting choice. Not exactly like a. I mean, yeah, he had his own comic book and things, but I mean, he was always kind of a supporting player in the Avengers. You know what I mean? I was like, this is an interesting choice. Of course, I'll go see it because I went to go see it, and I remember sitting in the theaters 10 years ago watching it, saying, wow, this is good. Mm-hmm. They've really, I mean, the character is written brilliantly. I mean, and he has this story arc where it's like he's not righteous. He's not just. He's not, he's not a Dudley Do-Right. He's not running in to do the right thing. As a matter of fact, he's kind of almost a villain towards the beginning of this movie. He just doesn't give a shit. And then, firsthand, he begins to see the consequences of his actions, and we see his growth, and we see how he plans on changing. And so we see him as he becomes Iron Man. He leaves behind Tony Stark and becomes a hero. And watching that story, I said, all right, they gave us a superhero movie that was grounded in the character, which was the most important thing, because it made it a good movie. So I remember, like, wow, this is really cool. Good thing. Like, this was awesome. And then I was told you got to sit through the credits, man. You got to sit through the credits. They give you something. Well, what is it? No, you just got to see it. You just got to see it. So I sat through the credits, and then right at the end of it, I mean, spoiler alert, Samuel L. Jackson walks on the screen bearing the likeness of the Ultimates universe, Nick Fury. He's got the eye patch. He's got the black leather trench coat. He's all furied out, and he tells us there's other superheroes in the world. And then you think, oh, shit, they're going to do something different here. This is kind of cool, because this now opened up the door for the serial universe. As you said, it's a shared universe. And we knew that there was other movies coming out, like in the same. I think Hulk came out like a few months later. But you're like, oh wait, maybe this one's going to tie in with this one. And then a few months later, you went to go see Hulk, and at the end, there's Robert Downey Jr. playing Tony Stark, and that confirms, okay, these movies all exist within the same universe. And when I think about the amount of time and planning that must have taken to set that up to where they are now over the past 10 years, it's daunting. But they've been doing it with the comics for years.
Right. I mean, they have to. Like, the Marvel bullpen requires a lot of editorial oversight. And let's be honest, though, like, comic books are not great about keeping their continuity between the many books.
Time travel. Retcon it.
They have to. Like, ultimately, like every year or so, they're like, let's have a massive superhero event, and then they have to deal with, like, whatever consequence.
The fallout.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing about Iron Man. You can't really say this about most of the Marvel films, but that film really dealt with terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's weird. And for 10 years ago, that was kind of more of a that I don't know. I guess times have changed. Not that terrorism isn't still out there, but I guess, with it goes with the times. I think, W was still in office.
It was the last year of W.
Yeah, it was the last year of W. We had been, we were only 7 years past from 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been kind of torturing people for a while.
Yeah, yeah, and like keep in mind, like Stark finds out at the beginning of the film that like his weapons have been given to terrorists.
And he didn't care. He didn't care at the beginning.
No, he didn't care about that because it's all about that bottom line. And I wonder if that's the thing that made Iron Man and also maybe the Dark Knight like step up, because you're dealing with these real world issues. Like all of a sudden we're looking at these characters who are bigger than life, but they're dealing with the world that we have to live in.
Yeah.
Where things are unstable, where the good guys are selling weapons to the bad guys, where the good guys are breaking laws and doing mass surveillance in order to help us.
Yeah.
It makes it complicates things, and I wonder if that adds a lot to the appeal of why like superheroes were able to get out of like this kind of Fantastic Four, Daredevil rut. Because those movies weren't trying to be anything more than like an excuse to watch people fight.
No, of course.
And I'm not saying that Iron Man is that much deeper. I just feel like by giving it the choice, by not giving it the choice, by literally framing it in this world that we share, that we live in, we are immediately more invested because it has this grounding. I'm not saying they're realistic. I'm just saying that there is that element that we can recognize in ourselves, in our lives, that takes it to that next level. And I think maybe that's why, Iron Man 2 and Incredible Hulk and Thor don't work as well.
Yeah.
There's not really much to those. Like Iron Man 2 has something, but it's way too much of a clusterfuck.
I feel like if those movies had any purpose whatsoever, aside from giving us the characters, it was just the fact that they were standalone movies, but still part of a whole. And it was important, if you want to stack it up and have those major events, you have to make us give a shit about those characters.
Right.
So maybe they weren't the best movies, but you at least got to know those characters. You got to know who Thor was. You got to see his arc, where he came from. I still think Captain America is a great movie.
I like the first half of Captain America quite a bit. I feel like it kind of devolves a little bit as it progresses, but there is some very strong stuff in the first Captain America. I don't feel there's a lot of strong things in Thor. I agree with you that it's great that these movies exist, and they exist as part of the same cinematic universe, which is something that we've never had before. And I don't know what that bodes for the future, to be honest with you. I see lots of film franchises trying to be born right now.
Yeah.
But Marvel did successfully do that. Like, regardless of how I feel about the Thor film and the Incredible Hulk, those movies are successful in that they build this cinematic universe. So, like, my feeling about the individual movie is much less relevant than my feeling about the overall universe.
Sure.
Which is kind of shifting the game a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally shifting the game. The way you look at it is all, like I said, they're standalone but part of a whole. Each one of those movies is a block in the building, basically. They've all worked towards something. And we saw a culmination of that in 2012,
right,
when two very important things happened in 2012, and I really feel like it was 2012 was like a big kind of out with the old, in with the new, because not only was 2012 the Avengers, the first movie that kind of that kicked off everything. Like, I mean, I guess it was already kicked off by that point, but by that I mean like you get to see
it's the first real payoff.
It's the first real payoff for the last 4 years of movies, but it was also the conclusion of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy.
Right.
So it was really like, it was, as I said earlier, it was kind of out with the old, in with the new, and they retired that version of Batman, never to return again. And we're being pushed into this larger world. It's the Batman movies were a little bit more modest, I guess you could say.
Maybe modest. Yeah, modest is a way of putting it. I mean, concerned with the real world in a way that Marvel movies
don't have to be.
They allude to the real world in the Marvel films. They're like, okay, so like the terrorism thing that we talk about in Iron Man. But that's not the point of Iron Man.
Yeah.
The point is really always going to be Tony Stark. Winter Soldier, like the point of Winter Soldier isn't that the government's spying on you. It's Cap's relationship with Bucky. And those are good stories, and they ground us in this real world. But unlike the Nolan films,
Mm-hmm.
where it's really all about like these ideas, like the Joker is an idea, and his idea is that like we're just so disconnected in this society that it like we're kidding ourselves about our relevance.
Sure.
And, I feel like The Dark Knight Rises is an unfortunate conclusion to that trilogy because there are a lot of ideas in that film, but I don't know that they actually ever congeal the way that
I was just gonna say, like they had some good points they made, but all the plots that ran those points didn't quite connect.
Yeah, especially the Occupy Wall Street riff that he has going through the film. Like in that early part, they're talking about the poor eating the rich, which is fascinating. Like, okay, that's cool. This idea of Batman not really being able to be Batman anymore. Bruce Wayne as a broken man wanting to be Batman is fascinating, and he pays for it. He pays for it quite dearly, but he doesn't earn it back in the end. Like the cost of pretending that he could still be what he was is clear, but it's undermined by the fact that he's just magically comes back. Like you can't just take this really powerful story.
Oh no, I fixed the autopilot. It's fine. Hey, how about that man? I'm sorry, that man that basically raised you, and you're just gonna let him think you were dead? You're a dick, dude. You are a dick.
How about his back gets broken and he gets it fixed by a little bit of like advanced prison chiropractic? Like, well, you're good now. No more broken spine for you.
Not to mention his knee was already messed up from the beginning of the movie, and he just puts a mechanical brace on and he's fine.
And he can scale walls.
He can do what no other person in that prison can do.
Right. It's absurd, and it takes away something. It takes away something, I think, to have the ending of The Dark Knight Rises also just be between Bane's goons and the cops. Like, what are you actually saying about
it was gang. I just saw that. I'm just like, were you just going for Gangs of New York here on this last scene with Batman as the general on one side and Bane as the general on the other? Because that's all I saw there.
If you were really going to do Gangs of New York, you needed to have 3 different groups or 4 different groups all fighting each other at once. Where were the people? Where were the people of Gotham?
Hiding in their buildings. I don't know. They would have probably, I mean, it was months. They probably would have been dead, let's be honest.
Probably. But like, since they weren't, I feel like the thing to do would have been to have them rise up. Like, okay, sure, start with the cops, and then have the cops lose.
Yeah.
Have the you got to show that the people have a will. And when you say that the people don't have a will, when you say that the people are just going to let whatever fate throws their way, that might be true, but that's certainly uninspiring.
Yeah.
You're not going to get people to be like, yeah, we can do better. Yeah, we cannot blow each other up. We have these options. And without that little bit of hope, I feel like Nolan started shifting into actually Snyder territory. Like maybe the truth is that we need, billionaires to come save us.
Right. Yeah. Well, we'll get to Snyder here in a minute because we're in 2012 now. We're going to start moving ahead to Snyder here in just a moment.
So to recap, we've moved so the Nolan verse, very self-contained, 3 solid films that all only exist for each other,
right? Versus
the Marvel films where now we're getting the serial thing,
right?
And yeah, now Nolan's done.
Yeah, so now Nolan is done. He's going to move on to greener pastures and do other things. He does make other movies, I guess, from time to time.
Yeah, 1 or 2.
So we bid farewell to Batman at the same time Avengers comes out, and by this point we're just like, wow, this is awesome, this is amazing. I mean, I remember being in the movie theater. I think I was living in North Carolina at the time, and actually you can go back from back 6 years and hear the podcast that I did regarding the Avengers, where I just gushed over it for an hour and a half straight. Because I was just so blown away to see that movie. So that's where Marvel had the bar set now. And so at this point, I guess, Warner Brothers, which owns the rights to DC, and they just concluded with Batman, they're like, oh, we need to get in on this action.
Let's do the exact same thing.
Let's do the exact same thing. And I said, yeah.
Why not?
Why not? Do it. You guys have great character. I've been a Superman fan. I'm still a Superman fan to this day, despite the fact that I don't see him portrayed on any medium really in the way that I want him to portrayed, but that's neither here nor there. So they introduce the very following year, coming out on the tails of Avengers, is Man of Steel, 2013's Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder. And I was like, oh, well, Zack Snyder did Watchmen. I know you take issue with Watchmen. I enjoyed it. I understand he missed the point of the stories, but I still thought it was a decent movie. 300, I love that stylized violence, the special effects. I was like, cool, I'm on board. Show me what you got, Zack Snyder. And I went in and I saw it. And it was one of those things where I enjoyed it, but it just felt off.
It made me angry. I walked out of the theater angry at that film. Not just because it's off. It's what you were talking about with Watchmen. Like, okay, he visually captures Superman very well.
Yes.
Very well. Maybe the best visual Superman I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the ideology...
Oh, missed. By a mile.
Understand what like, I get that you think that Superman's goofy and corny, and maybe he is, but that's what he's supposed to be in this world.
Yes.
We need beacons of hope. We need to believe that there's people who are capable of doing good because that's the right thing to do, and that we're not going to always take the easy, simple solution. Mm-hmm. Now, we could talk about the Zod murder in Superman 2, right? Like that, but
Man of Steel. Oh, you mean versus Man of Steel versus Superman 2.
Right,
sure.
Like, okay, so yeah, Superman's killed before.
I just feel like all they really did in that is just take away the illusion that Superman's not a killer. Because he really kind of always has been.
Yeah, but the way that he kills is different. It's like, okay, he had some creative solutions, right? He put them into the Phantom Zone in Superman 2, right? Like, he got that mirror and he sent them off into space or whatever.
Yeah, but he straight up threw Zod down a chasm.
Yeah.
He straight up murdered General Zod in Superman 2, just like he did in Man of Steel. Maybe not just like he did. He snapped his neck in Man of Steel. But he was remorseful. Yeah. He was sorry he did it.
Sort of the thing. Like, I'd rather he thought about, like, how he was going to do it instead of just snapping his neck.
Well, at that point, it was either Zod or the innocent people standing there.
He could have flown him into space.
And I will say this, though. You should not have written it so that Superman was backed into that corner.
Right.
That's the thing. It was like, well, he had no other choice. I'm like, yeah, but the writers had a choice. You are in control of this world. It's not like you're watching this and you don't have control over it. You wrote it so that he would have to snap Zod's neck. Why?
Right. And is it part of the story the whole way through? No, there's nothing else in that film about Superman feeling a moral quandary over taking a life. It's not the point at all of Superman Man of Steel. The question is whether or not he should save people or not. So the real question, like, if you really wanted to tie that in thematically, the question is, how do I save these people without just killing this guy? That's the moral quandary. That's the question.
Right.
And Snyder absolutely fails that question. Mm-hmm. He goes for the simplest solution, as he typically does, which is that he believes that violence is ultimately a solution to the world's problems. And historically, that might be accurate, but ideologically,
give us our heroes. You know what I mean? That's the point. That's the thing, though. Is that's how it works in the real world.
Yeah.
But the point of these movies is they need to give us something to aspire to be, something to look to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and now we're jumping all the way back to the beginning. We're talking about we were kids and we were growing up and we were, watching these superheroes on the screen. Why? Because they were powerful and we wanted to be them.
They're gods.
They're gods, essentially. Who doesn't want to be a god? Still to this day, I would. We all talk about, like, oh, what superhero power would you have? We all want it.
Teleportation.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But if we want to be that person, give us something. Give us a quality within ourselves. Heroes aren't heroes because of the power they wield, but because they give ceaselessly and selflessly to others.
And they overcome their problems in a way that we can understand and empathize with and possibly take for ourselves.
Right.
Iron Man 3 is all about PTSD.
Yeah.
That film is
I know I have that problem.
I mean, so many people do.
Yeah, a lot of people do, though.
Like you go to, how many soldiers do we have coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq at this point who are dealing with seeing images in their head?
Sure.
Iron Man 3 might be a goofy film, but it is very much about him overcoming his fear.
Yeah.
His like utterly feeling overwhelmed by the forces that are bigger. And who doesn't relate to that? Look at Captain America: Winter Soldier again. You know, like that film, he could have killed Bucky.
No.
He could have. He could, like, why not just kill him?
Yeah.
Why not just kill that guy? He's clearly a terrorist. He's clearly a threat to the state. But no, he goes out of his way, be like, no, I know you. You're a human being. You're a good person. And maybe he's not a good person, but he decides that he is a good person.
Yeah.
He decides that for himself, and he fights to make that guy come back to the goods, to the light or whatever. That's maybe not realistic in our world, but that's certainly something that we can aspire to and should aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, and that's where they miss the mark, I feel like, with the DC movies. But certain superheroes in the Marvel Cinematic Catalog have that, as you were saying, with Captain America. But I still haven't seen a single character in the DC Cinematic Catalog that's nailed it. Because with those movies,
Wonder Woman?
Maybe Wonder Woman is probably about the closest as they get. And I still don't feel like they nailed it, because I feel like any one of those movies really is just about taking it back to the 90s. All we're just going to give you the characters and the costumes that you like on screen, fighting people and blowing shit up. And it's not about the people. It's not about the characters. And that's where I feel like DC has missed the mark as opposed to Marvel.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely would agree for the most part, because I abhor Superman, Batman v Superman. I abhor Man of Steel, Suicide Squad. I haven't done this in a long time, but when I was watching it in the theater, I was yelling at the theater. Like, I was actually making
the
fun of it.
The nerd in the back. Oh, fuck you!
Yeah,
fuck
people
you,
were
Jared
not happy.
Leto!
I'm like, dude, it's not my fault they made a terrible movie.
They did.
So-
And you know what is sad? As sad as it is to say, I prefer Suicide Squad like 10 times more over Batman v Superman, which, by the way, didn't come out until 3 years after Man of Steel. They made us wait for. Okay, you're gonna make us wait for 3 years. Do something else. Like, give us a better story. Like, what did they even try to do with that story?
So it's like DC missed the point of what Marvel was doing, which was that they were using all these individual movies to set up the big movie.
Yeah.
Whereas Batman v Superman kind of just like, let's get there. Let's get to the big one already. And then let's get to now the Justice League. DC doesn't have patience.
No, they don't.
And they don't value character.
Well, they've already got plans for Justice League 2. And I'm like, why?
Did they?
Why?
Did it make as much money as the Avengers made in its opening weekend?
Not even a little bit.
Like, so no, they should probably move on. I think DC. When I heard that DC wanted to do like an individual Joker movie, I was immediately like, no. But then I think about that, and I wonder if maybe that is what they need to do. They need to just let go of this idea of the expanded DC universe.
Just let it go.
And
It's
just
done.
focus on making good movies.
Yeah.
Just make individual smart films that work. Because what Marvel did...
Green Lantern.
Yeah, no, that did not
I'm
work.
joking. No.
Yeah, well,
Very
Marvel-
few of their movies have.
I don't know if what Marvel has done can be replicated properly. Like, I'm getting the impression that it's not really going to work outside of this Marvel universe. Like
You look at Universal Studios is trying to do it too with their dark universe.
It's not working.
And I saw The Mummy, and I was like, "This is terrible." They don't even follow their own. They don't even follow the rules that they set forth, and everything is innocuous and weird and doesn't even make sense. And then they're like halfway through, like, "Oh, I'm Russell Crowe. I'm Dr. Jekyll. Okay, you become Mr." And then they have like little nods to like Dracula and stuff. I'm like, okay, I see what you guys are doing. You're building universe, but this is bad. And it's really sad because you could argue that Universal Studios with their monster movies, like way back, they had the first shared universe. They really did. Like they had the concept.
They were unconcerned about there being a shared universe.
That's true.
They weren't like it felt like they were all part of the same thing, but they weren't worried about it.
Right.
The way that I don't think I think Marvel has eased up on that. Actually, like they're not as concerned about making sure that every single film ties into everything, and they're more let's play with the playground that we have. Like Ragnarok. Okay, yeah, that definitely ties into the Avengers and Thor 2 and all sorts of things. But that film very much can exist on its own too. It's just a good time. Guardians of the Galaxy does not require you to watch any other Marvel films in order to get Guardians of the Galaxy. Civil War, yeah, you kind of do. Ant-Man, not at all. Why? Like, do you really need to know Iron Man to know?
No.
Ant-Man?
I mean, they mention Iron Man in passing, and that's fine. You don't need to know it. It's fine. Like I said, it stands alone, but it's part of a whole.
So I feel like maybe, like, DC proved that you can't just easily replicate it. Universal's proving that same thing. Maybe the idea of trying to, like, create a massive cinematic universe is a good idea for Marvel, and maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe we really shouldn't be trying to keep doing that over and over again, because honestly, I worry that maybe it's degrading these films to some degree.
Yeah.
I love
it's you're bringing the value of the property down, man.
Like, they're not going to be able to do another Infinity War. Like, we'll get, like, the follow-up to Infinity War very soon, in a year. But are they really going to be able to do that every 5-6 years?
No, no, absolutely
here's
not.
Another huge superhero. It's not going to keep.
I mean,
working.
I felt like that really kind of almost hit crescendo when we saw Civil War 2 years ago, and then like just topped out with Infinity War, and then I think we'll finally see it coming back down in about a year when we see Avengers Endgame, and I'm okay with that. Like, you know what? I'm okay with going back to a happy medium and bringing it back and making it about the characters again. You know what? Because, like I said, you can't sustain. You can't keep it up there.
Right.
The bar cannot stay. And I can guarantee all these fanboys, people like you and me, but not you and me because we're better than that.
Are we?
Oh, we are. No, we're totally better. But what's going to happen is, like, they're going to, after Avengers 4, they're going to put out some, Spider-Man 2 or something like that. Black Panther 2. And everyone's going to say, these movies suck. No, you are just expecting the bar to be where it just was. Scale it back down. Appreciate it on a character level. It's highs and lows. You can't just keep it up there. So, and that's what kind of concerns me about the future of these movies is that people are going to get bored now after it's over. You know what I mean? After 10 years, people are going to start to walk away.
So it's a hat trick to be able to kill off all of your characters or half of your characters.
Absolutely.
You can't keep doing that.
I mean, and it's temporary.
Right.
Because we know that these movies have scheduled sequels that are coming out.
The moment they come back, that feeling that we had, that we can never replicate that again.
Yeah.
We'll never be able to watch these characters die on screen again and feel that feeling that we felt when we watched Spider-Man die.
I mean, to be honest with you, like, I was watching them all die. I kind of figured that was going to happen anyways. But even watching them die, I'm like, well, spoilers, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're listening to
Sorry,
this.
if you're listening to this, we figured that you probably watched everything we've watched and more.
Yeah.
So.
But no, but watching all of these characters die, like I just, even then I knew, I'm like, well, this is not permanent. This is just for the next year.
Yeah, if they had taken out War Machine and the Falcon and left Black Panther and Spider-Man alive and maybe taken out Iron Man and Captain America, then you'd be like, holy cow, they really went for it.
I mean, honestly, I thought the other way was, I thought it was going to be Tony Stark and Steve Rogers were going to be gone because they're pretty much reaching the end of their contract. But I guess they've each got one more in them. And
yeah,
then
I think they're going to die.
And then those characters retire after that.
Yeah, well, one of them's probably going to be dead, and then we'll see what.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, but I guess. So I don't think Infinity War really works as a movie per se. If that, like it works, it's very enjoyable. But like as like a beginning, middle, end, here is the story. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, does it need to? Marvel Cinematic Universe has given us this opportunity to watch serialized film. Right?
Yes.
So we get to see this culmination film. We know who these characters are. We don't need to be reintroduced to Thor and Iron Man and Captain America. We got enough. Just throw us into it, right? Well, that's true for this as like an experience. But as watching a movie, I don't know that we'll be able to go back and watch Infinity War and feel like we're getting like a full experience. Nobody's going to watch that film. Maybe somebody will, but I think it'd be difficult to watch that film and walk away from it as like this is a self-contained story.
Yeah.
Because it's just clearly not. And I wonder if that loses something.
Right. Well, it's possible, but I was getting to, Marvel has films planned through 2025.
Right.
So, we'll see. Maybe after 2025 they decide to hang up Marvel Studios, or maybe they keep going with it with Disney acquiring the rights from Fox. It's sky's the limit.
Yeah.
They can keep going with it. We could see maybe we could see Secret War in 2025. You just don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't think we'll ever see an end to it. I just don't know that. Like, I think that now the norm is going to be cartoon movies, and that's what I think of when I think of like the modern action film is just CGI.
Yeah.
So there's really no limit. The only reason that they would ever stop is budget reasons, and they're just not making the money that they used to. And here's the fact, though: films are not getting as many people going to the films as they used to.
True.
While the box office continues to grow exponentially, that's only because ticket prices are going up.
They have to, because we're losing to that medium, to that market of streaming, and people don't want to leave their houses. They don't want to pay anymore. And, it kind of makes me sad, because I feel like, an end of a very long era. Because, going to the movies together, and, you remember, you went to go see Avengers, as did I. You sitting in a room full of people sharing the experience with you, and we're losing that.
We are. So I signed up for Movie Pass this summer, and I was very excited because I was like, I'm going to go see Infinity War as many times as I damn well please. And now they've changed it so that you can only do it once. You get one time per movie, which is kind of a drag. But this model of like a movie theater subscription, I think is probably what they're going to have to shift to, because I don't see the ticket model being a sustainable thing in the long run. Eventually, people just don't want to know that they're going to pay $15 for a ticket to go see a movie, because it's just not worth it anymore. Yeah. But if you can buy like a pass, if you can just go to the movie, I think this ties into that serial thing too. Like, people don't want to pay for one thing anymore. They want the whole experience. They want to see down the line. So if I'm going to go to a movies, I want to know that I'm going to go see many movies, not just one movie.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what will happen is what Spielberg and Lucas foretold, which is that we're going to not have movies. Yeah. We're going to have like maybe a big movie a year.
Be kind of a sad thing to say. I guess the only thing we have to do is just wait and see. But I feel like the demand for movies is always going to be there. It's just going to depend on the medium at which you get them.
Yeah, well,
we're seeing it. We're seeing it now, like Netflix original movies. It's only on Amazon Prime or only on Hulu. These movies, and I'm seeing it's like these major Hollywood stars are doing these Netflix original movies, and I'm like, why? Why did you got? Oh, okay, because that's where the medium's going. You guys are just getting ahead of the game. So, like I said, there's always going to be money in movies. Yeah. It's just going to be a matter of how they're made and what medium they're made for.
Right. So I think that's been interesting. So all during this time, there have been a lot of comic book films that came out that aren't like superhero films, right? So there was A History of Violence, Ghost World, The Road to Perdition, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. We're getting like... And I bring this up because I think what we're seeing now with television is the other end of the superhero franchises, right? Like, okay, Marvel is able to create this whole cinematic universe. The TV shows don't really tie into that, but they create their own sort of cinematic universe, right? Where the movies count for them, but the TV shows don't count. Yeah. The other way around.
Yeah, exactly. With the Netflix stuff.
Yeah, DC has built their own little cinematic universe, and then you get these other things like Legion on FX, Walking Dead on AMC, Preacher on AMC.
I only watched season 1. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting to me because they're still trying. I don't think that Preacher really works. I think it half works. I think Walking Dead worked for a little while. It doesn't really work anymore. Legion, first season worked very well. I don't know how season 2 will work. Not Walking Dead. Watchmen is going to be coming out.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, it kind of ties into this idea of adaptation, and that's sort of where I think that we can kind of conclude, because the Marvel universe isn't the comic books, right? The X-Men movies aren't the X-Men comic books. Christopher Nolan got very far from what made Batman Batman and still managed to hold on to who he is. So what will make it okay for adapting in the future? Like, I remember when the Fantastic Four came out, there was a lot of like guff about what's his name, Michael B. Jordan. Sorry?
Oh no, the new Fantastic Four, the 2014.
Yeah,
the one that I did a podcast just ripping it apart. But
right,
yeah, that's fine.
So like Michael B. Jordan took over the role of Johnny Storm, and I was actually very happy about that. I was like, cool, let's make like who cares what skin color these guys are? Let's see what we can do. And I was very much wanting to fight for that film, and then ultimately it just did not work.
Thanks, Trank.
Yeah, it's not his fault. It's Fox.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, maybe it was his fault too.
It was kind of his fault because when he couldn't get the rights to do Chronicle 2, he basically just turned Chronicle 2 into Fantastic Four.
Is that so?
Yes.
Explain to me what that means.
So okay, so Chronicle. Did you see Chronicle at all? Okay,
no.
so Chronicle was about a bunch of teens that get these powers and they're learning to do it. And then he proposed Chronicle 2 as it to be kind of like a coming of age story kind of thing. And if you go back and watch that movie, it's just basically he just took the structure for those characters and just laid Fantastic Four on top of it. So he basically just adapted the screenplay for Fantastic Four, which is why it was just felt so weird and disjointed. It didn't really feel like the Fantastic Four at all because the source material was not Fantastic Four. They were his characters,
I see.
which is kind of selfish.
Did you ever read Ultimate Fantastic Four?
I did one or two issues, yeah.
Like the initial run of that series, I thought is what he was going to go for, which is putting these kids in like a genius camp, and then they find this alternate dimension with the help of Victor Von Doom or whatever his name is in that, and they all end up going to that alternate reality and coming back the other side. So I thought, like, I'm watching the trailers for it, I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sound like it worked. Why do you think it like? So you think it's just because he's basically making them Chronicle characters?
They're because it wasn't the movie he wanted to do.
I see.
So they say, well, we can't do that, but we'll give you Fantastic Four. Okay, I'll just cross that off, and yeah, that's Ben Grimm now. That's not the other guy that I did.
So what do we need to see for adaptations to work now? Is really my question. Like, okay, so Watchmen is coming out. Zack Snyder, despite the fact that I don't think he got the ideology of the film, actually very much adhered to the literal plot of the story, whereas what Damon Lindelof will be doing, I think it's Damon Lindelof, I might be getting that. The guy who did The Leftovers is doing the Watchmen series.
Okay. David Lindelof was one of the co-creators on Lost, I think. So
that's correct. Yeah, he was like the showrunner for a while.
Yeah.
Once J.J. Abrams stepped aside, it was Lindelof's show. He's already said he's not doing a direct adaptation. Like, he's going to take the Watchmen's foundation and he's going to make it work for a television show. So I guess my final question really, how far can these superhero stories go from their source material and we still care? Like, we've really been talking about this the whole time. Like, okay, you can take Superman, you can put him into a depressing world, but if you have Superman start killing people, that might be a little too much.
Well, I think it's two things that are important to make it a successful adaptation, and I think it's partially what I'm saying and partially what you're saying. On my end, make me care about these characters.
Right.
Make them three-dimensional. Make the villain solid. Like, make me care about the villain. So he's not just some guy coming down from outer space saying, "I'm here to take over your planet." Mwah, ha 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 ha. Evil plan. Because while it's fun to watch them slug it out, like, if there's nothing behind it, then there's no substance to those fights. If we're going to have conflict, there needs to be meaning behind the conflict. And then on the other side, what you said, make the ideology right. Yeah. Do it correctly. Make it. If you start by making one point, stay with it. Don't just go off in this direction because you feel like this would look cool on screen, but completely abandon the point you made in the first act.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's where a lot of writers and movie producers fall short, is giving us characters we care about and sticking with the point of the story.
Right. Having a point to a story is really the bare minimum that a movie and television show and anything.
But yet, how
can
many
do.
of them have no point?
Right. Well, because they're serving the god of money, you know, and the god of like explosions.
Yay,
and,
capitalism!
you know, look, I'm not. I may be a dirty socialist, but I'm not going to like say that every film should adhere to my philosophical point of view. You don't need to. I prefer to have alternatives presented to me, but you better know what you're talking about, and you better back it up by having your characters' choices reflect that ideology in your film.
I think ultimately the comic book fans and the people who grew up reading these properties are smarter than the producers and writers give us credit for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's why you have fanboys that are so pissed off and they get bitchy because like a lot of these things are, I mean, we pay our money, but it's an insult to our intelligence. And I feel like that's why you get people that are so angry about movies. Not that getting angry over movies is cool. Like, I mean, if you're sitting there blogging about how pissed off you are over the movie, like, you know, go do something else. However,
live your life.
I understand. Yeah, live your life, because it's just, at the end of the day, it's just a story. But I understand why, because you feel insulted. You feel like the writers didn't give you enough thought to be like, oh, we'll just throw some special effects on the screen. They're stupid. They won't care. No, we're not stupid, and we do care.
Right. I mean, I don't think that audience members in general really think that much about the ideology as they're watching it.
Yeah.
It's really more about what you're doing after you've watched the movie. How does that film stay with you? Like, the reason that people don't give a shit about Thor: Dark World.
I gave a shit about it. It was fun.
Really?
I thought it was a fun movie. You know, it's not great. It's not Shakespeare.
So what's it about?
the prophecy of Ragnarok. Shut up, Rob.
That's what I'm saying. You want to chew on the thing afterward. Like people.
But not everything has to be.
No, some things are just bubble gum and you chew it and you spit it out and you're done.
That's what Ragnarok was to me.
Oh, Ragnarok. I think Ragnarok is bubble gum, but it's. I would say that.
Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about Thor 2?
Dark World.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't. Yeah, Dark World.
Dark World doesn't.
No, we're on different pages there.
Ragnarok, I think, while it's kind of goofy, it does kind of have something to it. It's replaying with Norse mythology to start with. The idea of Ragnarok on its own, the idea that things need to fall apart in order to continue on. That's a ideology.
Sure.
There's meaning to that.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's goofy fun, but they said what they needed to. Like, the film starts with him preventing Ragnarok, right?
Yeah.
And it ends with Ragnarok needing to happen. That's meaning.
Yes.
That's building meaning into a story. So the whole thing can be goofy as hell, but that doesn't mean that there's not a point to it. And that's something to chew on afterwards. That's something to think about. Like, I mean, you might not.
Yeah.
But you may also be like, yeah, no, like at the end of the day, Thor really, like, in order to win, he needed to let everything fall apart.
Yep. But, you know, ultimately, going back to what we said, that's, you know, the two big things that I would like to see from comic book adaptations moving forward is just substance and ideology, I guess. Substance and character, yeah. That's what I meant by substance.
Yeah. Okay, so ideology and character. Like, what is your point? What are you trying to do with your film? Are you just trying to make a buck? We can tell.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just these two guys' opinions. Who are we? We're just another couple comic book nerds, just like you guys. Yep. Yeah, you know, but I feel like a lot of people feel the way we feel.
I think so. I think people are hungry for meaning.
Well, I think that's. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there, man. It's been a lot of fun. You know, I started podcasting like 6 years ago, and I've done on and off. And I started doing this one back in 2014, and I did it on and off. But ultimately, you know, if you listen to it at all, if you enjoyed it, I appreciate it. I'm not saying that I'm done podcasting forever. Maybe when I'm off ships and I'm not out at sea and I have more time to do it, maybe I'll come back and I'll do something that's a little bit more focused. But until now, I think that's gonna wrap it up for Welcome to Nerdtopia. And Rob, thanks so much for sitting in on it with me, man. This was like just like hanging out like we were in high school again, because this is pretty much all we did in high school was have these conversations. We just didn't record it.
Yeah. You are now privy to our nerdiest of thoughts.
For Welcome to Nerdtopia, I'm Doolin Dalton.
I'm Robert Jaffe.
Thanks for nerding out with me, guys. Have a good night.